My name is Corinne Andrews. I'm 28 years old. I woke from a 3-week coma to find the hospital room completely empty. No father, no brothers, no flowers, no cards, no half-eaten bag of chips left on the visitor's chair. Nothing at all. Only a single sheet of thick, watermarked stationery resting on my bedside table, embossed at the top with Andrews Residence, Greenwich, Connecticut, my father's handwriting beneath it. Corinne, we've decided to stop covering your medical expenses. Your brothers agree it's time you manage things yourself. Good luck, Dad. I read it 4 times. Then I cried for a solid hour. But my father made one critical mistake. He forgot what my mother had left behind, and he certainly forgot about the man in the gray suit who stepped into my room on the 3rd day. Before I continue, if this story is resonating with you, please consider liking and subscribing, only if it truly speaks to you. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, to the house where I grew up, and to the family that taught me silence was the same thing as love. I'm an ICU nurse, night shift, 12 hours on, 12 off, at a mid-size hospital in Stamford, Connecticut. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment with paper-thin walls and a radiator that bangs at 2 a.m. I pay my own rent, I buy my own groceries, I drive a 9-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door I never bothered to repair. There was always something more urgent: a power bill, new work shoes, another student loan payment. The Andrews family lives 26 minutes away, but it may as well be another continent. My father's house, the one I grew up in, is a 5-bedroom colonial in Greenwich, stone facade, wrought iron gate, heated pool out back, 3-car garage where his Range Rover parks beside my stepmother's Mercedes and my brother Preston's BMW. The dining table is custom walnut, seats 12. Every Sunday, Diane sets 4 places: Harold at the head, Diane to his right, Preston across from her, sometimes Grant if he's in town. There was never a 5th chair. I stopped being surprised by that long ago. You can only show up uninvited to your own family's dinner so many times before the message sinks in. The last time I tried, Diane smiled from the doorway and said, "Oh, Corinne, we weren't expecting you. Let me check if we have enough." Behind her on the counter sat 2 untouched ribeye steaks. My father never looked up from his phone. That was 3 years ago. After that, I simply stopped. Stopped calling on Sundays, stopped driving to Greenwich, stopped pretending that if I stayed quiet enough, useful enough, good enough, they would eventually make space for me. But I should explain why I kept trying for so long, why I spent 16 years convinced I owed them something. For that, we have to go back to when I was 12. My mother's name was Margaret Ellis Andrews. She was warm in the quietest, most unshowy way, the kind of person who slipped notes into your lunchbox and remembered exactly how you took your eggs. She came from money, the Ellis side, though she rarely mentioned it. What stays with me most are her hands gliding over piano keys, teaching me scales on Saturday mornings, and the Cartier watch she always wore, slender gold band, a gift from my grandmother Eleanor. She never took it off. On March 7th, I had a piano recital at school, a modest event, 12 kids in the gymnasium. I'd practiced for weeks. My father promised he'd pick me up at 8:30. He didn't come. I waited in the lobby 45 minutes, calling his cell over and over, straight to voicemail. Finally, I phoned my mother. She'd been home for hours, assuming everything was fine. She didn't hesitate. "Stay inside, baby. I'm coming." It was raining, not a drizzle, a downpour, the kind of raw Connecticut March storm that turns roads into rivers. My mother drove her sedan straight into it because her 12-year-old daughter was standing alone in a school lobby and her father wouldn't answer his phone. She never made it. A pickup truck hydroplaned through a red light on Route 106. The collision struck the driver's side. She was pronounced dead at Stamford Hospital at 9:47 p.m. My father arrived an hour later. I sat in a plastic hallway chair, still in my recital dress, clutching a paper cup of water a nurse had handed me. He stood above me. He didn't kneel. He didn't hold me. He simply said, "Your mother drove out in that storm because of you." 3 days later, at the funeral, my grandmother Eleanor held me close and whispered, "Your mother made sure you'd be taken care of." I didn't understand what she meant then. I was 12, and I had just learned that love could be something you were punished for needing. Diane Mercer entered our lives 2 years later. She was polished in ways my mother never attempted. Weekly blowouts, Chanel flats, a smile that landed half a second before her eyes followed. She called me sweetie and said I had my mother's cheekbones. Within 6 months, she had moved in. Within a year, she and my father were married. Within 2, everything that had belonged to my mother was gone, erased in careful, gradual pieces I barely noticed until nothing remained. First, the photographs. Margaret's portrait above the fireplace, replaced by a Nantucket landscape Diane had chosen. Then the piano. "We need the space for Preston's office, sweetie. You understand." Then my bedroom. One afternoon I came home from school to find my belongings moved to the attic room on the 3rd floor. Diane said it would be more private. The room had a sloped ceiling and no closet. Preston was Diane's son from her previous marriage, 4 years older than me, already away at college when Diane married my father. Yet Harold treated him like the firstborn he'd always wanted. "Preston's going to take over the business someday," he'd announce at dinners. "Preston understands how the world works." That year's Christmas card showed 4 people. I was at a friend's house when they took the photo. No one told me. Once, when I was about 15, I asked my father if my mother had left any papers, any documents, anything at all. He set down his fork, fixed me with that calm boardroom stare, and said, "Your mother didn't leave anything, Corinne. She left debt. I cleaned it up. Don't bring her up again. You've done enough." So I didn't. 16 years. That's how long I carried those words in my chest like a stone lodged too deep to cough out. Your mother drove out in that storm because of you. It shaped everything. Why I never fought for my bedroom, why I stayed silent when the piano vanished, why I turned down a partial scholarship to nursing school and chose the cheaper program instead, because my father said nursing was fine for someone with your limitations. Don't waste resources. I believed him. I believed every word. When you're told at 12 that you caused the worst thing that ever happened to your family, you spend the rest of your life trying to balance the scales. You don't set boundaries, you don't ask questions, you say yes sir and thank you. You gather whatever scraps of attention they throw and tell yourself that's what love feels like. That was my life until March 14th of this year. I was driving home after a 12-hour shift in the ICU. It was nearly midnight. Exhaustion had settled deep, the heavy, eye-burning kind that makes the world feel distant. I never spotted the box truck barreling through the red light on Elm Street until its bulk filled the entire windshield. I have no memory of the collision, no memory of the sirens or the ambulance ride. They say my heart stopped once in the ER. The team brought me back. They also say my father was notified. He remained my emergency contact, a small, outdated detail I'd never removed because part of me still clung to the hope that he might appear. He did show up once, during the first week. Grant told me later that Harold paused in the doorway, scanned the monitors and tubes keeping me alive, muttered, "This is going to be expensive," and walked out. Week 2 brought only Grant. Week 3 brought no one. And then I opened my eyes to that note. Here's the detail that haunts me now. A week before the crash, while clearing out a box of forgotten things in my apartment closet, I uncovered something. A torn envelope tucked at the bottom of a carton I'd carried out of the Greenwich attic years before. My name was scrawled across the front, along with my childhood address at the estate and an unfamiliar logo, some private bank or trust firm. The letter itself was missing. The envelope had been hastily ripped open and left empty. I dismissed it as old junk mail and set it aside. I wish I'd stopped. I wish I'd looked harder. Waking from a coma bears no resemblance to film scenes, no cinematic flutter of eyelids, no desperate inhale while family huddles close. It creeps in slowly, hazily. My throat felt scorched from the breathing tube. My left wrist was immobilized in plaster. Every hinge in my body seemed packed with damp sand. The overhead fluorescence droned on, and for what felt like forever, that low buzz was the only sound. No voices, no approaching footsteps, no soft exclamation of, "She's awake!" I turned my head, carefully, painfully, and surveyed the sterile emptiness. The unoccupied visitor chair, a drooping cluster of carnations on the windowsill, the $12 hospital gift shop variety, cellophane dulled with dust. No one had disturbed them in days. Then I noticed the note. I read it the way one reads a sentence that refuses to compute. "Karen, we've decided to stop covering your medical expenses. Your brothers agree it's time you manage things yourself. Good luck, Dad." Thick cream stationery, Andrew's family crest embossed at the header. My father's script, neat, forward-leaning with that slight leftward tilt, identical to the one that once signed my report cards without a glance at the grades. I pressed the call button. Nurse Linda entered, took my vitals, and informed me I'd been unconscious for 22 days. "Has anyone been here?" My voice rasped like broken glass. She hesitated. "A woman visited about a week ago. She signed paperwork discharging financial responsibility and instructed us to send all future statements directly to you. She left those flowers." Linda gestured toward the fading carnations. She looked pressed for time. Diane, naturally. I clutched the note to my chest and wept for an hour. Not because they had gone. I believe some quiet part of me had always anticipated it. I cried because the truth finally landed, that they had never truly been present. In that narrow hospital bed, memories arrived in slow, relentless surges. Every occasion I'd silenced myself to preserve the fragile calm. My nursing school graduation, top of my cohort, clinical honors, 3 strong recommendation letters from attendings. I texted my father the date and time 2 months early. On the morning itself, his reply arrived. Something came up. Congrats. No punctuation, no warmth. Grant was out of town. Diane never replied. I crossed the stage to courteous applause from strangers, then stood alone in the parking lot and took a selfie against my Civic, still in cap and gown. I kept that picture. My smile looks forced, almost pleading. Thanksgiving 2 years earlier, Diane hosted 20 people at the Greenwich house. The table shimmered with her new Waterford crystal and eucalyptus runners. She presented Preston to the room. "This is Preston, Harold's eldest. He's in commercial real estate now. We're so proud." As I ferried platters from the kitchen, one of Harold's partners asked who I was. My father answered, "That's Karen. She helps out." Not "my daughter," not "she's an ICU nurse," simply "she helps out," as though I were part of the waitstaff. Later, I stood at the sink washing dishes for an hour while Preston paraded his new BMW, a congratulatory gift from Dad for his first major closing. 6 months prior, I'd asked my father for assistance with a security deposit. His response, "Maybe if you'd chosen a real career, you wouldn't need to ask." Yet, I kept returning. Every uninvited holiday, every overlooked birthday, I showed up anyway. Because 12-year-old Karen was still waiting in that school lobby, still hoping someone would arrive. And the cruelest truth, was believing that scraps and silence constituted love, believing that was precisely what I deserved. 2 days after regaining consciousness, I tried reaching my family. Grant's number diverted immediately to an automated message. This number is not accepting calls from this line. I stared at the screen. Blocked. My own brother had blocked me. I told myself it might be a new phone, a glitch, anything, but my fingers trembled. I dialed my father's cell. Voicemail. I left nothing. What words could possibly fit? "Hi, Dad. I nearly died. Just checking in." I called the house landline. Diane answered on the third ring. I heard the crisp click of her heels on tile, the kitchen most likely. Her tone was smooth, practiced, unruffled. "Karen, how are you feeling? We heard you were awake." "I was in a coma, Diane, for 3 weeks. I almost died." A measured pause. Then the gentle, patient voice she reserved for moments when she wanted you to feel irrational. "And we're glad you're okay. We really are. But your father and I have discussed this, and we believe it's healthiest for everyone if you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. You're 28. Most people your age don't depend on family to cover medical bills." "You signed documents transferring my hospital debt to me while I was unconscious." "We were trying to help you grow, sweetie. You can't lean on your father indefinitely." I squeezed the phone until pain flared through my cast. "Is that what you call this? Growth?" Her pitch lowered slightly. "Preston's wedding is 3 months away. We have expenses. Your father is closing a very significant deal. This isn't the moment for drama." Then, almost casually, "And I should mention, we've informed the family that you've chosen to go your own way. Everyone understands." She ended the call. In Diane's retelling, it was I who departed. Now the numbers. 3 weeks in ICU, emergency splenectomy, fractured wrist, 2 cracked ribs, mild TBI. Pre-insurance total exceeded $187,000. My employer plan absorbed some, but after deductibles and out-of-network fees for the specialist Harold had briefly authorized, I faced approximately $43,000 in personal responsibility. Savings, $6,200. Unable to work for at least 8 weeks. Car totaled. Auto claim pending. Lease expiring in 6 weeks. No funds for first and last month's rent anywhere new. There I lay, in a thin gown tied loosely at the back, scrolling through financial aid forms on a phone with a spider-webbed screen. And the sum total of my worldly support was a wilted bouquet from the woman who had quietly signed away my medical coverage while I lay unconscious. I set the phone down. I stared up at the ceiling, those pale acoustic tiles dotted with tiny holes you count when sleep won't come. I thought of my mother, of what she might say if she could see me now. Then I thought of the words my father had repeated for 16 years, that she left nothing, that she left only debt, that I was the reason she never came home. I reached for the note on the nightstand, read it once more. "Good luck." I folded it precisely, slid it into the drawer, and spoke aloud to the empty room. Enough. I didn't know what came next, but I was finished earning their love. I was 28 years old, and I was done. That was Tuesday. On Thursday, a man I had never seen before knocked on my hospital room door. Before I tell you about him, though, you need to know what Harold was doing while I was trying to calculate how to survive on fumes. He was shaping the story. Wednesday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from my Aunt Claire, Harold's sister, whom I'd seen perhaps 5 times in the last decade. "Karen, I saw your dad's email. I'm really disappointed in you, after everything he's done." I had no idea what she meant. An hour later, a college friend, Becca, forwarded the same email with her own note at the top. "Hey, is this real? This doesn't sound like you." Harold had sent it from his personal address to what appeared to be his entire contact list: relatives, business associates, old friends, at least 30 names. Subject line: a difficult family update. He spared most of the details, but the key sentences seared themselves behind my eyes. Karen has unfortunately burned through every opportunity we've given her. She's refused to take responsibility for her life and has blamed this family for her own choices. After years of support, we've made the painful decision to step back for her own good. And then the final line that turned my stomach inside out: her mother would be ashamed. He wrote those words about me, the daughter still lying in a hospital bed, and broadcast them to everyone we knew. Diane's contribution was quieter, more elegant. A post in the family's private Facebook group: we tried everything. Sometimes you just have to let them fall so they learn. Praying for her. Followed by a small heart emoji. Within hours, my phone filled with messages from people I barely recognized, all of them reciting Harold's version like a hymn they'd memorized. "We're so sorry your father had to go through this. We hope you get the help you need." No one asked my side. They didn't have to. Harold Andrews was the patriarch, the philanthropist, the self-made success. I was simply Karen, the difficult one. Preston called Thursday morning. I almost didn't pick up. But that same foolish, stubborn part of me, the part that had kept returning to that house for 28 years, wondered if he might be calling to apologize. Maybe the email had finally gone too far, even for him. Karen. No hello, no how are you, just my name delivered flat like he was confirming a table reservation. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. Dad's being generous here. He could ask you to repay every dollar he's ever spent on you. He's choosing not to. You should take that as the gift it is." "I just woke up from a coma, Preston." "And you're fine now. You're talking, you're thinking, you're fine." "The point is, Diane sent you some paperwork, a release form. You sign it, you move on with your life, we move on with ours. Clean break." The documents had arrived 2 days earlier by courier, a thick legal packet from Harold's personal attorney demanding that I sign a voluntary waiver of any and all claims to Andrew's family assets, properties, holdings, everything. I'd read it twice, bewildered. If my mother left nothing, if Harold had cleaned up her supposed debt, then what exactly was I waiving? "What am I giving up, Preston? Dad told me Mom left nothing." A careful pause, then measured. "It's just formality. Dad's reorganizing the estate for a new development deal. Some old trusts need to be cleaned up. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Old trusts. I'm not signing anything I don't understand. "Karen, I said no." He hung up. I sat there clutching my cracked phone, and for the first time in 16 years, I didn't feel guilt. I felt suspicion. Why would a family that insists you have no claim need your signature to prove it? Diane arrived in person the next day. She entered the way she always did, like she'd stepped straight off a magazine page: cream cashmere coat, leather gloves, a small bouquet of white tulips in her arms. She smiled sweetly at the nurse's station, asked for my room in that honeyed voice, and I could hear them murmuring to each other what a lovely woman she was. Her heels clicked down the corridor. She closed the door softly behind her, placed the tulips beside the dead carnations on the windowsill, then turned to me. The smile vanished. "You're making this difficult, Carrie." "I'm not signing those papers." "Your father's deal closes in 6 weeks. This is the largest project of his career. If you cause problems—" She smoothed her coat, selecting each word with care. "He has relationships at every hospital in this region, board members, donors. One conversation and your little noosing career disappears. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I understood perfectly. It wasn't a warning, it was a threat. delivered in the same gentle tone she'd used years ago to explain why my bedroom was being moved to the attic. "What am I giving up, Diane? If Mom left nothing, why does Dad need my signature?" A flicker crossed her face, gone in an instant. "Because the trust company won't—" She stopped, lips pressing into a thin line, then recovered, smooth as glass. "Because it's just paperwork. Don't overthink it." The trust company. She said it out loud. I watched her eyes do that quick calculation, whether to retreat or press on. "I'm not signing anything I don't understand, and I'm done being scared of this family." Diane picked up her gloves, walked to the door. "You were never as smart as you think you are. That's always been your problem." She closed the door quietly. Diane never slams. She doesn't need to. But she had said it. Trust company. And in that moment, a torn envelope buried in a moving box and my grandmother's whisper at a funeral stopped feeling like coincidences. The next few days were the lowest. My hospital bill sat on the rolling tray table like a headstone, $43,000. My bank account, $6,200. The numbers didn't care how broken I felt. I called billing, arranged a payment plan, $400 a month, which I also couldn't afford, but it bought time before collection started. My lease expired soon. No car. Savings might stretch 6 weeks if I lived on rice and eggs. The hospital social worker left stacks of financial assistance pamphlets on my bed. I filled them out at 2 a.m. with a pen that kept skipping. Harold's email kept rippling outward. A coworker I thought was a friend texted, "Hey, I don't want to get involved, but someone said you have some issues going on. Just want to know that we're here for you." He hadn't accused me of addiction outright. He'd only hinted at choices, at patterns, at getting the help she needs. He knew precisely how to sow doubt without leaving prints. I sat alone at 3 a.m., listening to the distant beep of a heart monitor and the low drone of the heating system, and I spoke to my mother in silence. "If you were here, would you tell me to keep trying with them or to run?" Then a clearer thought arrived. I've been paying for a debt that was never mine. 16 years of apology for a storm I didn't cause. I was 28 years old, lying in a hospital bed, and I had nothing. No, that wasn't true. I had a question, and that question was worth everything. Grant called on Tuesday at night from a number I didn't recognize. "Corinne." His voice was low, urgent. "I'm using a friend's phone." Dad put something on my line. I don't know, some kind of family plan tracker, maybe. He'd see that I called you. "Grant, are you okay?" "Listen to me." His voice cracked, urgent. "I should have said something years ago, and I didn't because I'm a coward, okay? I know that, but you need to hear this now." I could hear him breathing hard, like he'd been running or fighting back tears. My little brother, 26 years old, and still terrified of our father. "Before Grandma Eleanor died," he went on, "she told me something. She said Mom left something for you, something real, something Dad was supposed to give you when you turned 25. He never did." My hand tightened around the phone. 25? I was 28 now, 3 years gone. What was it? I don't know the details, but I found papers once in Dad's office, bottom drawer of his desk, the locked one. They had a logo on them, some trust or financial company. I can't remember the exact name, but it started with Hartford or Hartwell, something like that. My whole body went cold. The torn envelope, the logo I'd tossed aside like trash. "Dad caught me looking," Grant continued, voice dropping to a whisper. He grabbed my arm so hard it bruised, said if I ever mentioned Mom's papers again, he'd cut me off completely. That was the angriest I've ever seen him, not yelling, quiet, like ice. In the background, I heard a voice, Diane, calling him. "I have to go. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner." The line went dead. I had a name now, a trust company, and for the first time, I had somewhere to aim. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, phone propped against the water pitcher, and searched every variation I could think of. Hartford Trust Company, Connecticut, Hartwell Financial Trust, Trust Management, Connecticut. My hands shook, partly from the lingering nerve damage in my left arm, partly from something far deeper. On the second page of results, I found it. Hartfield Trust and Fiduciary Services, Hartford, Connecticut. The logo matched. I was certain. The same serif typeface, the same navy and gold crest, identical to the one on the torn envelope buried in my moving box. At 9:01 a.m. the next morning, the instant their office opened, I called. A receptionist answered, professional and pleasant. I gave her my name, Karen Andrews. I'm calling about a trust that may be in my name. I don't have an account number. I'm sorry, I don't really know. A brief pause, the soft click of typing. Then her tone warmed, edged with something like concern. Miss Andrews, please hold for one moment. 30 seconds of gentle hold music. Then a man's voice, older, steady, the kind honed by decades in boardrooms. Miss Andrews, my name is Richard Calloway. I'm the managing trustee of the Margaret Ellis Andrews Irrevocable Trust. I have been trying to reach you for 3 years. I couldn't speak. Your mother anticipated this possibility, Miss Andrews. That's exactly why she made the trust irrevocable. 2 days later, Richard Calloway walked into my hospital room carrying a brown leather briefcase that looked older than I was. Behind him came a man I'd never seen, late 40s, navy suit, small silver pin on his lapel that read Hartfield Trust. He introduced himself as Thomas Whitfield, Senior Fiduciary Officer. The man in the gray suit, well, navy, close enough. Calloway took the visitor's chair, the first person to actually use it since I'd woken up. He opened the briefcase on the rolling tray table, moving my water cup aside with a quiet, "May I?" that carried more courtesy than my father had shown me in a decade. Miss Andrews, he began, your mother, Margaret Ellis Andrews, established an irrevocable trust in 2008, 2 years before her death. You are the sole beneficiary. The trust was funded by your maternal grandmother, Eleanor Ellis, and contained 2 primary assets. He placed the first document on the table, a copy of the trust instrument, 46 pages, my mother's signature flowing across the final page. First, an investment account currently valued at approximately $2.1 million. I stopped breathing. Second, he set another document beside it, a property deed, stamped and recorded with the county clerk. That's my father's house. No, Miss Andrews, it is not. Calloway's voice remained precise, never unkind. Your mother purchased that home in 2004, 2 years before she married your father, using funds from her family inheritance. A prenuptial agreement kept it as separate property. Upon her death, it transferred into the trust. Your father has been living in that house for 16 years, but he has never owned it. Thomas Whitfield placed a third item on the table, 3 certified mail receipts, each signed Diane Andrews. Your father didn't just forget about you, Karen. He used what was yours to build what he thinks is his. I didn't speak for a long time. The documents rested on that hospital tray like relics from a different life, a life in which my mother had still been thinking of me, still protecting me even from beyond the grave. The trust instrument bore her handwriting on the margins, small notes to her attorney, initials in blue ink. I traced one with my fingertip. She knew, I said, voice breaking. She knew what he was. Calloway nodded. Your mother was a careful woman. She came to me before the marriage and said very clearly that she wanted her daughter provided for, regardless of what happened. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. I thought of my grandmother Eleanor at the funeral, leaning close, whispering, your mother made sure you'd be taken care of. I was 12. I thought she meant heaven. The tears came then. Not the hollow sobs from the night I woke up, but something deeper, like a dam finally giving way after years of pressure. I cried because my mother loved me enough to plan for this. I cried because my father hated me enough to hide it. And I cried because I'd spent 16 years apologizing for existing in a house that was mine. Calloway and Whitfield waited. They didn't rush me. When I finally wiped my face with the back of my good hand, Calloway asked, "What would you like to do?" I looked at him, at the deed, at the trust papers, at the certified mail receipts bearing Diane's forged signatures. "I want what's mine," I said, "and I want him to hear it from me, not from a letter." Calloway reached into his briefcase and withdrew an ivory envelope, thick and embossed, an invitation to the Andrews Foundation Charity Gala. Harold was being honored that night. Then we need to talk about timing. He laid it out plainly, the way I imagined he handled every delicate matter. No drama, just facts. Harold had leveraged the Greenwich property, my property, as collateral for a $4.5 million commercial development deal. He'd submitted paperwork to the lender claiming full ownership, but the deed remained in my mother's name, transferred to the trust the day she died. Harold had never held title. What he'd done was, at minimum, a blatant misrepresentation of asset ownership. At worst, it was mortgage fraud. "The lender is First Capital Regional," Whitfield said, opening a folder stamped with the bank's letterhead. "If they learn the collateral doesn't belong to Mr. Andrews, the loan becomes void. The entire deal collapses." "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Legally, 2 things," Calloway replied. "First, we file formal notice with First Capital that the property pledged as collateral is held in trust and was never available as security. Second, we petition to transfer full operational control of the trust assets to you, something that should have occurred 3 years ago, on your 25th birthday." He paused. "Both steps are straightforward. The real question is how and when." I told him I didn't want to ambush anyone. I didn't want a spectacle. But I also refused to handle this through letters Harold could intercept, phone calls he could deny, or lawyers he could tie up for months while I slept in my car. "I want the truth delivered in the room where he usually lies," I said. Calloway studied me for a moment. Then he nodded. "The gala is in 12 days. Harold is being honored. The deal is scheduled to be formally announced that same evening. Representatives from First Capital will be in attendance." He placed the property deed on top of the stack. I could see the county seal, the date 2004, 2 years before the wedding, and my mother's name printed in crisp, unyielding type. "Your mother prepared the shield, Karen. I'm simply here to make sure you know you're holding it." I was discharged on a Thursday. Grant helped the way Grant always helps, quietly, efficiently. He booked a room at a Hampton Inn in Hartford on his own card and texted me the confirmation from a burner phone he'd bought at a gas station. "Don't tell Dad," he said. I didn't bother pointing out how absurd that sentence sounded, 2 grown adults hiding from their own father like fugitives. The hotel room was small, clean, anonymous. A queen bed with a faded floral spread, a coffee maker stocked with 2 packets of generic grounds, a window overlooking a parking lot. It was the most peaceful place I'd been in weeks. I spent the first 3 days simply healing, walking slow laps around the hallway in my socks because my ribs still screamed with every deep breath, eating soup from the diner next door, sleeping 12 hours straight while my body quietly stitched itself back together. On the 4th day, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and practiced. Not a speech. I'm not a speech person. Just the 3 or 4 sentences I needed. I repeated them to my reflection until the tremor left my voice. Calloway had given me a manila folder. Inside were copies of everything: the trust instrument, the deed, the certified mail receipts, the prenuptial agreement, and one document I hadn't asked for, a copy of the police accident report from March 7th, 16 years ago. I held that report for 20 minutes before I could open it. My hands trembled. I knew somehow that whatever was inside would rewrite something fundamental, not about the money or the house, but about the story I'd told myself since I was 12. I wasn't ready, not yet. The gala was in 10 days, and somewhere in Greenwich, my father was rehearsing his acceptance speech, standing in a house that didn't belong to him, preparing to announce a deal built on a lie. He had no idea what was coming, but honestly, neither did I. The Andrews Foundation Charity Gala was held at the Del Mar, Greenwich's most exclusive boutique hotel. I knew this because the invitation Calloway had given me described every detail: cocktails at 6, dinner at 7:30, program at 8, black tie preferred, valet parking available. I arrived at 8:15. I skipped the valet. From the lobby, I could already hear it, the low roar of 200 people in a ballroom, the bright clink of champagne flutes, a string quartet playing something tasteful and forgettable. Through the double doors, I caught glimpses of the room: cathedral ceilings, crystal chandeliers throwing warm pools of light across white tablecloths, towering arrangements of white lilies and hydrangeas on every surface, the kind of event where the flowers alone cost more than my monthly rent. Harold was on stage. He stood behind a podium draped in navy fabric, wearing the Brioni suit I'd once watched him try on at the Greenwich Tailor 3 years earlier. Diane sat at the front table in a black Valentino gown, hair swept into an elegant updo, diamond studs catching the light. Preston was beside her, wearing the same distant expression he always did, like he was already thinking about his next meeting. The master of ceremonies, a city councilman, was in the middle of the introduction. A philanthropist, a visionary developer, and above all, a devoted family man. Harold Andrews. Applause. A standing ovation from the front tables. Harold took the microphone. He thanked the foundation. He thanked his beautiful wife, Diane. He thanked his son, Preston, who would carry the Andrews name forward. He gestured broadly, magnanimously, the way men like Harold gesture when they believe the room belongs to them. Then he said it. This development project is built on land and assets that have been in my family for decades. Everything I have, I built with my own hands. I stood in that ballroom beside Richard Calloway and Thomas Whitfield, and I watched my father lie to 200 people. It was the last lie he would ever tell in that room. I waited until the applause died and the waitstaff began pouring the next round of champagne. Then I walked in. I wasn't dressed for a gala. I wore a dark blazer over a white blouse, the nicest outfit I owned that still fit over my cast, and simple black trousers. My hair was pulled into a low, tight bun. The only jewelry I wore was a pair of small silver studs that had once belonged to my mother. Calloway had given me a manila folder. Inside were copies of everything: the trust instrument, the deed, the certified mail receipts, the prenuptial agreement, and one document I hadn't asked for, a copy of the police accident report from March 7th, 16 years ago. I held that report for 20 minutes before I could open it. My hands trembled. I knew somehow that whatever was inside would rewrite something fundamental, not about the money or the house, but about the story I'd told myself since I was 12. I wasn't ready, not yet. The gala was in 10 days, and somewhere in Greenwich, my father was rehearsing his acceptance speech, standing in a house that didn't belong to him, preparing to announce a deal built on a lie. He had no idea what was coming. But honestly, neither did I. The Andrews Foundation Charity Gala was held at the Del Mar, Greenwich's most exclusive boutique hotel. I knew this because the invitation Calloway had given me described every detail: cocktails at 6, dinner at 7:30, program at 8, black tie preferred, valet parking available. I arrived at 8:15. I skipped the valet. From the lobby, I could already hear it, the low roar of 200 people in a ballroom, the bright clink of champagne flutes, a string quartet playing something tasteful and forgettable. Through the double doors, I caught glimpses of the room: cathedral ceilings, crystal chandeliers throwing warm pools of light across white tablecloths, towering arrangements of white lilies and hydrangeas on every surface, the kind of event where the flowers alone cost more than my monthly rent. Harold was on stage. He stood behind a podium draped in navy fabric, wearing the Brioni suit I'd once watched him try on at the Greenwich Tailor 3 years earlier. Diane sat at the front table in a black Valentino gown, hair swept into an elegant updo, diamond studs catching the light. Preston was beside her, wearing the same distant expression he always did, like he was already thinking about his next meeting. The master of ceremonies, a city councilman, was in the middle of the introduction, a philanthropist, a visionary developer, and above all, a devoted family man, Harold Andrews. Applause, a standing ovation from the front tables. Harold took the microphone. He thanked the foundation, he thanked his beautiful wife Diane, he thanked his son Preston, who would carry the Andrews name forward. He gestured broadly, magnanimously, the way men like Harold gesture when they believe the room belongs to them. Then he said it. This development project is built on land and assets that have been in my family for decades. Everything I have, I built with my own hands. I stood in that ballroom beside Richard Calloway and Thomas Whitfield, and I watched my father lie to 200 people. It was the last lie he would ever tell in that room. I waited until the applause died and the waitstaff began pouring the next round of champagne. Then I walked in. I wasn't dressed for a gala. I wore a dark blazer over a white blouse, the nicest outfit I owned that still fit over my cast, and simple black trousers. We must have looked like an odd procession, a battered woman flanked by 2 men in crisp suits, threading through a sea of evening gowns and tuxedos. Heads turned, conversations fractured mid-sentence. I caught a whisper, "Is that Harold's daughter?" and felt the ripple spread. Diane saw me first. I watched the color drain from her face in slow motion, like someone had pulled a plug and let it all empty out. She leaned toward Harold and murmured something I couldn't hear. Harold turned. His public mask, the one polished for galas and handshakes, flickered, then snapped back into place. He descended from the podium, champagne glass still in hand, smiling the careful smile you wear when 200 people need to believe everything is fine. "Karen," he said, voice warm and projected for the room, "what a surprise. I didn't think you were well enough to be out." The entire ballroom watched. I looked at my father, this man who'd left a note on my nightstand, who'd told 12-year-old me I'd killed my mother, who'd lived in her house, spent her money, erased her memory, and called it all his own. "I'm standing, Dad," I said. "That's more than you planned for." The silence that followed swallowed every corner of the room. Harold's smile tightened. I knew that look, the one he wore when a deal teetered but the client was still watching. Control at all costs. "This isn't the time or the place, Karen," he said, low enough to sound private, loud enough that the nearest tables caught every word. "Why don't we step outside?" "You've had 28 years to talk outside," I replied. "You left me a note." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Forks settled quietly on plates. Diane was already rising, gliding toward us with that locked-in smile, the one that promised everything was fine, nothing to see here. "Karen, sweetie," she said, touching my arm with performative gentleness, "you've clearly been through a lot. Maybe you should sit down. You don't look well." I turned to her, kept my voice level. "Diane, I'd like you to explain to everyone here why you signed for certified mail addressed to me 3 times and never told me." Her hand froze on my sleeve. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Harold's smile vanished. "What is she talking about?" Before Diane could answer, Richard Calloway stepped forward. He unbuttoned his suit jacket with the calm precision of a man who'd stood in 1,000 rooms just like this one. He nodded politely to the nearest tables. "Good evening. My name is Richard Calloway. I'm the managing trustee of the Margaret Ellis Andrews Irrevocable Trust, established in 2008 by the late Mrs. Andrews." He looked straight at Harold. "My client, your daughter, is the sole beneficiary of a trust you were legally obligated to disclose to her 6 years ago." He paused. "Shall we continue here, Mr. Andrews, or would you prefer to step outside?" Harold didn't move, his jaw locked. His champagne glass hovered, frozen at chest level. 200 people waited. He chose to stay. Of course he did. Men like Harold don't leave rooms. They believe the room will always side with them. That was his second mistake. "This is absurd," Harold declared, making sure his voice carried. He set the glass on the nearest table and turned to face Calloway with the posture of a man who wins arguments by sheer presence alone. "My late wife didn't have a trust. Whatever this woman has told you, she's either confused or she's been manipulated." This woman. He called me this woman in front of 200 people. Calloway didn't flinch. He opened his briefcase on the edge of the nearest table between a bread plate and a crystal water glass and laid out 3 documents in a neat row. "This," he said, "is the original trust instrument, signed by Margaret Ellis Andrews and notarized on October 14, 2008. This is the property deed for 14 Edgewater Lane, Greenwich, recorded with the county clerk on March 21, 2004, 2 years before your marriage. And these are 3 certified mail receipts sent to that same address, intended for your daughter, each one signed by Diane Andrews." The room went so quiet I could hear ice shifting in someone's glass. Harold glanced at the documents. I watched his expression flicker just for a second, from contempt to recognition. He knew those papers. He'd known about them all along. At the VIP table, a tall man in a dark suit rose. I learned later his name was Hargrove, senior officer at First Capital Regional, the bank funding Harold's $4.5 million deal. "Harold," Hargrove said, voice calm but cutting through the hush, "is the property you submitted as collateral the same property referenced in these documents?" Harold's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Preston, at the family table, leaned forward. "Dad, what's going on?" Harold looked at Calloway, to the deed, to me. "That house is mine," he said, but the conviction had bleeded out of his voice. "Living in a home and owning it are 2 very different things, Mr. Andrews." The room didn't erupt. This was Greenwich, after all, but I heard it, the low hum of 200 people recalculating everything they thought they knew about Harold Andrews. Chairs creaked. Phones slipped under tables. Someone near the back stood for a better view. Hargrove walked from his table to where we stood. His face was the controlled blank of a man whose institution had just learned their $4.5 million loan rested on collateral that never existed. "Mr. Andrews," he said, voice very calm, "if the property you pledged as security is held in an irrevocable trust and never legally yours to offer, we cannot proceed with the transaction. The deal is suspended, effective immediately. Our legal team will be in contact Monday morning." Harold's face went white, not flushed, not red, white. The blood simply vanished. "Robert, listen to me." "I've heard enough tonight," Hargrove cut in. He straightened his cuffs and walked out of the ballroom without a backward glance. Then Diane turned on Harold. I'd never heard her voice at that pitch, raw, stripped of every layer of practiced sweetness. "You told me the house was yours. You told me the papers were handled. You told me there was nothing to worry about. Diane, stop talking." But it was too late. 200 people had just heard Diane admit, in her own words, that Harold had instructed her to intercept my mail. The room didn't gasp. It simply absorbed the truth, the way fine crystal absorbs light before it shatters. I could have stopped there. The deal was dead. The truth about the house was out. Calloway had what he needed. But there was one more thing. The document I'd been carrying in the inside pocket of my blazer since I'd finally read it alone in that Hampton Inn 3 nights ago. "There's something else," I said. Harold looked at me. For the first time that night, I saw real fear in his eyes, not the calculating anxiety of a man losing a deal, but something raw, deeper, the kind of fear that comes when the story you've told the world and yourself for 16 years is about to be rewritten in front of everyone who ever believed it. The kind that comes when you realize the lie you've built your life around is about to be spoken aloud in front of everyone who ever believed it. I pulled the police accident report from the inside pocket of my blazer. My hands were steady. I had rehearsed this moment, not the words exactly, but the weight of them, for 16 years. "You told me my mother died because of me," I said. "You told me she drove into that storm because I called her. You let me carry that guilt. You weaponized it. Every time I questioned you, every time I tried to push back, you repeated it. Your mother drove out in that storm because of you. I heard it so often I started dreaming about it." The room was utterly still, not a clink of silverware, not a rustle of silk. "The police report from that night says something different." I held it up so the nearest tables could see the official stamp. "It says you, Harold Andrews, agreed to pick me up from the school recital at 8:30. It says my mother called your cell phone 5 times between 8:45 and 9:10. You never answered because you were at a poker game on Fairfield Avenue and you'd turned your phone off." I looked straight at him. "Mom didn't drive into that storm because I called her. She drove into it because you didn't show up. And then you blamed a 12-year-old girl to cover your own failure." Harold's mouth opened, moved silently, closed again. No sound came out. Behind him at the family table, Grant stared at the floor, tears tracking down his cheeks. Preston sat rigid, palms flat on the tablecloth as though it were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. I didn't ask for an apology. I'd stopped waiting for one long ago. "The lie ends tonight," I said. What happened next I never expected. Grant stood. He'd been seated at the family table all evening, silent, as always at these events, present but invisible, the second son who never challenged Harold, who swallowed every objection and nodded along. I'd spent years frustrated with him for it, and years understanding it because I'd done the same. But now he rose, pushed his chair back slowly, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and walked away from our father's table toward me. Every head in the room followed him. He stopped in front of me, his voice cracked on the first word. "I knew," he said, not just to me, but to the room. "Not everything, but enough. I knew there were papers Dad was hiding. I knew something was wrong about the way he talked about Mom. And I was too scared to say anything." He looked at me, eyes red. "Corinne, I'm sorry. I should have been braver. I should have been your brother." Harold's voice sliced across the silence like a blade. "Harold, sit down." Grant turned to face him. My 26-year-old brother, who had never once defied Harold Andrews in his life, met our father's gaze and said very quietly, "No, Dad, I'm done sitting down." Diane reached for Grant's arm, reflexive, possessive. He pulled away. "You intercepted her mail, Diane. Don't touch me." Grant stepped to my side. He didn't need to say more. For the first time in 16 years, I wasn't standing alone in a room full of people who had already decided I didn't matter. I felt his hand brush mine, just briefly, the quiet way you reach for someone when you want them to know you're there without drawing more attention. A few guests near the back set down their napkins. One couple stood and moved to our side of the room, then another. Not many, maybe 8 or 10 people, but enough. Harold Andrews sat down, not dramatically, no stagger, no hand to his chest. He simply pulled out a chair at the nearest empty table and lowered himself into it. His Brioni suit remained perfectly pressed, his hair stayed in place, but something behind his eyes had gone dark, like a house where every light had been switched off at once. He didn't speak. No defense, no counterattack, no "you don't understand," just silence. And from a man who commanded every room he ever entered, that silence said more than any confession could have. Diane was already gone. I caught the flash of her Valentino gown disappearing through the service exit, heels clicking double time on the tile. She didn't look back. Preston followed 3 seconds later, phone already pressed to his ear. Calling whom? I didn't know. A lawyer, probably, or her mother. The golden child finally realizing the throne he'd been promised rested on borrowed ground. Calloway stepped forward, spoke briefly to one of Hargrove's associates who had lingered behind, and handed over a business card. I heard him say, "My office will send formal documentation to First Capital on Monday. The county records are public. Quiet, professional, final." I looked at my father one last time. He sat alone at a table set for 10. The champagne in the glasses around him was still cold. The lilies were still fresh. The program on his plate still read, "Honoring Harold Andrews, a legacy of leadership." I thought about saying something, a final line, some closing sentence that would seal 28 years of silence, guilt, and endless trying to matter, but there was nothing left to say. I turned and walked out, my brother beside me, through a ballroom that was already beginning to murmur again, the soft sound of a story being rewritten in real time. I thought I would feel triumph. I didn't. What I felt was quiet, like a room after a storm has passed. Here's what happened in the 3 months that followed. Calloway filed the formal trust transfer petition the following Monday. Because the trust was irrevocable and I was the named beneficiary, the process moved cleanly, delayed only by the volume of motions Harold's attorneys threw at it. They requested extensions twice. The court denied both. By early June, I had full control of the trust assets. The investment account, now valued at $2.13 million after years of modest, steady growth, and the deed to 14 Edgewater Lane. Harold received formal notice that his residency at the property was at the discretion of the trust beneficiary. I gave him 30 days to vacate. It was more time than he had ever given me. First Capital Regional voided the $4.5 million development loan. Their legal team referred Harold's file to the State Attorney General's office for review of potential mortgage fraud and misrepresentation of collateral. His own attorney advised him to settle before the matter escalated. He did. Quietly. The way powerful men sometimes disappear when the light finally finds them. The legal fees alone, I was told, were projected to top $200,000. Diane filed for divorce in mid-May. Her attorneys cited irreconcilable differences, but the timing told the real story. When the money vanished, so did she. I might have felt sorry for Harold if I were a more generous person, but the note he left on my nightstand was still too fresh for generosity. Preston called once. I didn't answer. He left a 4-minute voicemail, full of long pauses, throat clearing, and sentences that circled without landing. I didn't know the full picture, Karen. If there's anything I can do, I deleted it. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. Preston had spent his adult life choosing the winning side. Now that the sides had flipped, his call wasn't remorse, it was repositioning. The Andrews Foundation Charity Gala wasn't held the following year. No one stepped forward to organize it. I sold the Greenwich house in July. I know some might find that strange. A $3.2 million property, the place I grew up in, the last place my mother ever touched. But that house held more ghosts than memories. Every hallway, every room, every floorboard carried years of silence and smallness. The attic bedroom with its sloped ceiling, the kitchen where I washed Thanksgiving dishes while Preston showed off his new car, the front door Diane closed in my face. I didn't need a mansion. I needed a life that belonged to me. I found an apartment in West Hartford, 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, big windows that flood the living room with morning light. It's a third-floor walk-up. My ribs complained for the first month, but I didn't care. I signed the lease with my own name. When I set my bag down on the empty floor, I stood there for a full minute, just breathing. I went back to nursing. A different hospital, a new team, a fresh badge that reads C. Andrews, RN. Nothing more. No one here knows about the gala, the trust, or the house in Greenwich. They know me as the night shift nurse who stays calm in a crisis and brings homemade banana bread to staff meetings. That's enough. Grant and I have dinner every Thursday. The same small Italian place near his apartment, red checkered tablecloths, flickering candles, bottles of house red. The kind of restaurant where no one is trying to impress anyone. We talk about real things now, not the careful, surface-level exchanges we used to have while Harold listened for any wrong note. Real things. Hard things. He started therapy in April. I started in May. On my bookshelf, beside a small jade plant and a stack of novels I keep meaning to read, sits a framed photo of my mother. Simple, silver frame. She's laughing, holding me as a baby, her Cartier watch catching the sunlight. For the first time in 16 years, when I look at that picture, I don't feel guilt, I feel gratitude. I spent 16 years apologizing for existing. I believed my father's version of the story, that I was the reason my mother died, that I deserved less, that I should be thankful for whatever scraps fell from the family table. I built my entire sense of self around being sorry. The day I stopped was the day I started living. If you're still here, and I hope you are, thank you. Not just for watching, but for listening. There's a difference, and it matters. I don't know what your version of that nightstand note looks like. Maybe it's a text that went unanswered. Maybe it's a door that never opened. Maybe it's a silence that stretched so long you began to think it was normal. I don't know your story, but I know this. You are not the story someone else wrote about you. You are not the name they called you at the dinner table, the chair they never set, or the mail they intercepted before you could read it. I didn't win because I was smarter or louder. I didn't win because I stormed in with some perfect revenge plan. I won because my mother thought ahead, and because one morning in a hospital bed, holding a note that said, "Good luck," I decided I was done being sorry. My mother left me more than money. She left me proof that someone once believed I was worth protecting, and that proof was enough to make me believe it myself. My name is Karen Andrews. I grew up in a house that turned out to be mine. I was raised by a man who told me I was nothing, and by a mother who quietly made sure I would always have everything. And now, for the first time, that name is mine. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment. I read every one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, a sister, a daughter, a friend who's still standing in that school lobby waiting for someone to show up, share it with them. There are more stories linked in the description that I think you'll connect with. Thank you for being here.